Barnstable Town Council discusses the finer points of 4 proposed problem property ordinances. Details on this episode of Barnstable Today. It's Friday, March 15th, 2013. I'm Sarah Colvin. Thursday night, Barnstable Town Council met in workshop session to discuss the 4 remaining proposed problem property ordinances. Councilors again demonstrated their ability to work together effectively, sharing thoughts, ideas, and concerns. The first item of discussion, the ordinance relating to blight and vacant properties, took up more than an hour of the meeting. Councilor Tom Rugo raised concerns about staff necessary to keep an eye on those properties.
Which is, and I can understand Tom's concern about this ordinance, the other one, perhaps both of them, staffing. If we do implement this as written, it could create a lot of burden to the enforcing authorities. I think Ann's idea about reviewing what's available and what is silent out there now, and we're trying to address in this and maybe narrow what we're doing, is a good idea. Sharpen the pencils, as Jen said, and if that's what you meant, I think this is too inclusive and too broad, and it has effects that we don't intend. Thank you.
Councilor Fred Chirigotis talked about the foreclosure process.
Impose costs, which would initially increase the cost of the foreclosed property. I think the idea is to get it into, once a property's been foreclosed, you want to be able to get it into somebody else's hands. The price goes down. You want someone to invest, buy it, and bring it back up. But when you impose additional cost, then the cost of the property itself is increased, and that creates another problem that I don't think we're trying to do. I don't think that's what we're trying to do. I'm in agreement with what Mr. Rugo said, is that it's very broad. It applies to every property in town. I have a problem with that. If this were applying specifically to chronic problem properties or specifically to vacant and foreclosed properties, it's easier to accept that, but across the board to every property in town, I have difficulty with it.
Councilor Jennifer Cullum chimed in as well.
Currently, there's nothing that's attacking the problem, which is the chronic abandonment, rundown, things that are rotting the neighborhoods to the core. So something needs to be fashioned, and whether it comes from this or it comes from everyone emailing to Ruth and David what their particular inclination is, I really urge us to come to something here, because in every village there's issues. Everyone gets the emails. So what we have now is not sufficient on any level, because otherwise 182 Burses Way would be vaporized, and my kid, when he's leaving daycare, would look at that and think that might be my future,
Councilor June Daly stressed the importance of enforcing rules already on the books.
Well, I just think that it doesn't sound like the Board of Health, where are you, has, I think it's really up to them and not us to decide their regulations. And I think that it would be nice to have them look at this and make their recommendations as to what would be good for them.
Comments came again from the Health Division.
4 building inspectors, and what we would do is, after the initial major visit, then the rest of it would be, the follow-up to that major visit would be simply drive-bys, to make sure that the primary thing that we're looking for is health safety, to make sure that no one can get in. Can the kids get in? Can they do what kids are going to do? And the primary thing that we're interested in doing is to try to prevent that. That is done by a drive-by. If we were to physically stop at every abandoned property, that's all we would ever get done. And so at this stage of the game, it's pretty much a drive-by.
Attorney Ruth Weil shared information.
We did look at other models when we were drafting this anti-blight, so we didn't do it in a vacuum. And the group we work with were very diligent in providing various models and spent a lot of time doing research. So this wasn't done in a vacuum.
Thank you.
I think from my perspective, we'd like direction. I hear that it sounds like, but I want to be clear about this, that there is a desire to tweak and narrow the blight maintenance ordinance, but also in addition bring forward an abandoned property. Am I hearing that correctly? Okay.
Yes.
Councilor Cullum said there are many things that could cause a home to become abandoned or uncared for a short period of time.
You know, there's a million different possibilities out there. People die, there's 42 people that own the house, they hand it down through heredity, they all go to probate, blah, blah, blah. Who knows? But the problem is that while that property goes into disrepair, everyone around it suffers. Their property value suffers too, and those people have a right to not have that happen. So, although, I mean, I understand that the unintended circumstances thing is very important, but also the rights and the rights of other people are very important. And that's where I stand on it. I think that we need to get somewhere with that.
Councilors agreed more discussion is needed on that particular ordinance. Noise was next. Attorney Weil talks about what's on the table.
The Voices of the Village came forward with concerns about how mainly rental houses that generated a lot of noise really disrupted the quality of life in neighborhoods. And initially the discussion was, could we include that in the chronic problem properties? But Boston had considered that, and they felt that legally it would be hard to justify impugning the conduct of tenants for non-criminal ordinance violations. So then we looked towards the noise ordinance to see how we could enhance that. During this process, we heard public comment that raised concerns about having the landlord being responsible for noisy tenants, and a number of councilors raised concerns along those lines as well.
Councilor James Tinsley shared a personal perspective.
Just from my precinct, at least, and the feedback I've received, I've heard a lot from quite a few individuals who would like to see this ordinance have as much teeth as it possibly can have. On a personal level, if I just pull myself out of the seat and just personally, I can name 3 properties immediately around my residence that I will make sure when this passes, a copy in whatever language it needs to be will be at the door. Because I think it needs to be done. It needs to be passed. I can sit in my living room on my couch and listen to 3 different parties at virtually any time I want to, and it's just, it has to stop. And something like this, we need to have it. And trying to get a hold of the landlords of these 3 properties is virtually impossible. So maybe this will get their attention. You see, I think some of the misinformation out there is that we want to punish landlords. No, I want you to answer my phone call so we can talk to your tenant and get this handled.
Chief Paul McDonald says the proposed ordinance would be a big help to his department.
The noise violation, noise ordinance, is probably one of the most commonly used ordinances that we use in the police department. And this particular ordinance says there's a couple of big improvements that we see, and it's not on the enforcement aspect. You know, the first big enforcement is, one, the landlord, when they lease some property, is they're giving notification to their leases, to the tenants, that we have this ordinance in effect, and if you violate, this is what's going to happen. And the second one is notification of the landlord. This is something, the police department, probably should have been doing right along, because if we can get that voluntary compliance from the landlord, that's going to go a long way. In defense of some of the landlords, they probably don't even know what's going on in some of these rental properties. They might not be on Cape. So I think the owners probably should be on us. I think it's a good idea, and I should have been doing it right along. I accept responsibility. We will notify them. As far as citing the landlord, if we're working with them, if they're cooperating with us, and while they're working with us, and if there is a violation, we certainly wouldn't cite them. I mean, if the landlord who owns the property, if they're working with us to solve the problem, we certainly would not cite them.
Councilors met Thursday night for about 2.5 hours discussing the finer points of those ordinances, as well as sharing concerns about the appeals board, which will need to be created. A vote on some of these ordinances could happen quite soon. Council meets in regular session next Thursday at 7 o'clock. With Barnstable Today, I'm Sarah Colvin.